The winter of 1893 arrived with unusual severity in the remote Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. Snow piled in dense drifts around the newly constructed Birchwood Orphanage, a three-story Victorian structure that rose from the wilderness like a misplaced monument. The building stood isolated at the end of a winding road, surrounded by skeletal birch trees whose white bark glowed eerily in the moonlight. Local records indicate that the orphanage opened on December 7th, though few in the nearby town of Black Hollow celebrated its arrival. The institution was founded by the Grendel siblings, Augustus and Millicent, wealthy New England transplants who had purchased the vast wooded property for what locals considered a suspiciously small sum. The previous owners, the Alderman family, had abandoned the land after a series of unexplained tragedies culminating in the disappearance of their youngest daughter. Though search parties combed the forests for weeks, 7-year-old Esther Alderman was never found. The child simply vanished, reads an entry in Sheriff Thaddeus McAllister's journal, recently discovered in the Black Hollow Historical Society archives. No footprints in the fresh snow, no sign of struggle in her bed. Mrs. Alderman claims to have heard singing the night before, though no one else in the household reports such. The family has suffered enough. I've advised them to sell and start anew elsewhere. The Grendels arrived 6 months after the Aldermans departed, bringing with them considerable wealth and peculiar customs. Augustus, a gaunt man with a scholar's stoop and eyes that never quite met those of his conversation partners, claimed to have studied at prestigious European universities, though he never specified which ones. Millicent, his elder by 3 years, was tall and imposing, with prematurely silver hair always pulled into a severe bun. She spoke with precise diction and managed the practical matters of their shared affairs with intimidating efficiency. Their stated mission was simple: to provide shelter and education for orphaned children from across the region. The timing seemed providential. A typhoid outbreak had recently swept through several mining communities in neighboring counties, leaving dozens of children parentless. The Grendels' offer to house these unfortunates was met with both relief and gratitude by overwhelmed county officials. What followed has been pieced together from various sources: fragmentary orphanage records, town meeting minutes, personal correspondence, and most significantly, a leather-bound journal discovered in 2022 during the demolition of what remained of the Birchwood structure. The journal belonged to Eleanor Webb, a young teacher who arrived at the orphanage in January 1894, 1 month after its opening. Her meticulous observations provide the most complete contemporary account of what transpired behind Birchwood's ornate wooden doors. January 8, 1894. I arrived at Birchwood today after a journey I feared would never end. Eleanor wrote in a neat, disciplined hand. The final leg by carriage was particularly treacherous, the road nearly impassable with snow. Mr. Grendel received me in his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books in languages I cannot identify. He speaks little, observing me as one might study an insect under glass. Miss Grendel is more forthcoming but no less unnerving. She showed me to my quarters, Spartan but adequate, and introduced me to the children at supper. Eleanor's initial entries described 27 children ranging in age from 4 to 12 years. She noted their unusual quietness, their pallor, and their tendency to whisper among themselves when adults weren't watching. Most troubling to her was their apparent resignation. None spoke of adoption or future prospects beyond the orphanage walls. January 17, 1894. I've asked Miss Grendel about the adoption procedures. She smiled that bloodless smile and said simply, "The children who come to Birchwood remain at Birchwood, Miss Webb. They are ours to nurture and protect." When I pressed further, suggesting that surely the goal was to place them with loving families, her expression hardened. "These children have been abandoned once. We do not subject them to the whims of strangers who might abandon them again." Town records confirm that despite numerous inquiries from potential adoptive parents, particularly for the younger children, not a single child was ever released from Grendel care. Most curious was the fact that the orphanage continued to accept new children while never reducing its numbers through adoption or the natural aging out of older residents. The first signs of something truly amiss appeared in Eleanor's journal roughly 6 weeks after her arrival. February 25, 1894, little Abigail Stewart woke the dormitory with her screaming again last night, the third time this week. When I reached her bedside, her eyes were open but unseeing, her small body rigid. "She's calling me," she kept saying. "The lady in the walls is calling me." It took nearly an hour to calm her. In the morning, she remembered nothing of the episode, but I noticed fresh scratches on her arms. When I inquired about them, she looked frightened and whispered, "Miss Millicent says I mustn't talk about my dreams." Eleanor's concern grew as similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. Children reported hearing singing in the walls, particularly at night. Several began sleepwalking, always headed toward the orphanage's east wing, a section kept perpetually locked and off-limits to both children and staff. Most disturbing were the drawings that began appearing in the children's lesson books. Crude but consistent depictions of a tall, thin woman with flowing dark hair and hollow eyes, often shown reaching for small, faceless figures. March 10, 1894. I discovered Samuel Reynolds attempting to pry open the east wing door with a fire iron this morning. When I stopped him, he looked through me rather than at me and said in a voice utterly unlike his own, "She's hungry. The lady says she's so hungry." I've confiscated the fire iron but said nothing to the Grendels. Something tells me they would not react well. As winter yielded reluctantly to spring, Eleanor's entries document a change in the orphanage routine. Augustus Grendel began leading small groups of children into the surrounding woods at dusk. When questioned, he explained they were studying nocturnal flora, an educational pursuit befitting his scientific background. Yet Eleanor noted that the children who returned from these expeditions seemed altered, more withdrawn, less responsive to their names, and prone to staring vacantly at nothing for hours. April 3, 1894. 3 children fell ill today with the same symptoms: fever, confusion, and a strange rash on their palms resembling burn marks. Miss Grendel refused my suggestion to summon the doctor from town, insisting she had medical training sufficient to the task. I watched her administer a thick dark liquid that smelled of earth and copper. The children's symptoms abated within hours, but they now sleep too deeply, their breathing so shallow I must place a mirror before their lips to ensure they live. Eleanor's growing suspicions were temporarily interrupted by the arrival of Dr. James Harrington, a Boston physician who came to Birchwood in mid-April. Handsome, well-spoken, and carrying letters of introduction from prestigious medical institutions, Dr. Harrington claimed to be conducting research on childhood development in isolated communities. The Grendels welcomed him with uncharacteristic warmth, giving him free access to the children for his examinations. April 20, 1894. Dr. Harrington requested my assistance today in examining the newest arrivals, the Miller siblings brought to us after the mine collapse in Coleridge. He is methodical in his work, measuring skull dimensions and testing reflexes, yet I cannot shake the feeling that his true interest lies elsewhere. He questioned the children at length about their dreams, paying particular attention to those who mentioned the singing lady. When young Emma Miller described hearing a woman calling her name from inside the walls, his eyes lit with an unsettling intensity. Eleanor's initial distrust of Harrington gradually gave way to cautious alliance as she recognized in him a potential confidant. Their shared concerns about the Grendels' methods led to clandestine conversations, usually conducted during walks on the orphanage grounds, where they could speak without fear of being overheard. May 2, 1894. James and I walked to the small pond beyond the eastern edge of the property today. Once certain we were alone, he confessed he came to Birchwood with purposes beyond his stated research. He has been tracking the Grendels for nearly 2 years, following a trail of unexplained disappearances at 3 other institutions they briefly operated before abandoning them under mysterious circumstances. "There is a pattern, Miss Webb," he told me, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Children vanish, questions arise. The Grendels move on, only to establish elsewhere under slightly altered names. When I asked why authorities haven't intervened, he laughed bitterly. Who truly investigates when orphans disappear? Society has already discarded them once." The alliance between Eleanor and Dr. Harrington deepened as spring advanced. Together they began keeping records of the children's strange experiences, noting patterns and correlations. They discovered that those who reported the most vivid dreams of the singing lady were invariably selected for Augustus Grendel's nighttime forest expeditions. Several never returned, their absences explained away as transfers to specialized institutions or, in 2 cases, as runaways. May 17, 1894, we counted the children at breakfast today. 22. There were 27 when I arrived in January, and we've received 5 new orphans since then, yet only 22 small faces looked back at me this morning. When I mentioned this discrepancy to Miss Grendel, her explanation was ready. 2 transferred to a school for the deaf in Pennsylvania, though neither child had hearing impairments. 3 were claimed by previously unknown relatives, though no documentation exists. And 5 ran away, though the orphanage is miles from anywhere a child might run to. The most disturbing aspect is that the remaining children seem not to notice their missing companions. When I mentioned Daniel Cooper, with whom Samuel had shared a bed for months, Samuel looked at me blankly and asked, "Who?" The pivotal moment in Eleanor's account came in late May, when she and Harrington made a shocking discovery in the orphanage's root cellar. Having noticed that Augustus Grendel made regular nighttime visits to this underground space, they seized an opportunity to investigate when both Grendels departed for a rare overnight trip to secure supplies in the nearest large town. May 30th, 1894. God help us for what we found beneath the floorboards of the root cellar. James removed the loose planking to reveal a narrow tunnel, roughly hewn and descending at a steep angle into the earth. The smell that rose from it, decay and something else, something sweet and cloying, nearly overwhelmed us. Using lanterns, we ventured perhaps 50 yards along this passage before it opened into a chamber that I struggled to describe in rational terms. The walls were covered with symbols, unlike any language I've encountered, carved directly into the stone and smeared with a substance I fear was blood. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn smooth by use. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were small cloth bundles. James unwrapped one with trembling hands to reveal a child's shoe containing, I can scarcely bring myself to write it, human milk teeth. Each bundle held similar tokens, locks of hair, fingernail clippings, small bones, but most horrifying was what we found carved into the altar's surface. Names. Dozens of names, each followed by dates. Some I recognized as children who had left Birchwood. The most recent, Emily Thatcher, Timothy Walsh, Daniel Cooper, had disappeared just weeks ago. And on the wall behind the altar hung a portrait so old the canvas had begun to rot. A woman with flowing dark hair and hollow eyes, her mouth open in what might have been song or screaming. Eleanor's account describes their hasty retreat from the underground chamber, their decision to take 2 items as evidence, a small bundle containing a lock of Emily Thatcher's distinctive red hair, and the journal they found detailing ritual procedures in Augustus Grendel's handwriting, and their plan to ride for the sheriff at first light. But their conspiracy was discovered before they could act. June 1st, 1894. They knew. Somehow they knew what we had found. I woke last night to find Millicent Grendel standing motionless at the foot of my bed. her silver hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since I've known her. "You shouldn't have gone below, Miss Webb," she said in a voice that seemed to emanate not from her throat, but from the walls themselves. "She's awake now. She knows you've seen her children." I tried to flee but found my limbs unresponsive, as though some invisible force pinned me to the bed. Millicent approached, her movements unnaturally fluid, and placed something cold and metallic on my forehead. "Sleep now," she whispered. "When you wake, you'll understand your purpose here." The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was her face shifting, features melting and reforming into something ancient and hungry. The journal entries become fragmented after this point, suggesting Eleanor's mental state was deteriorating. She describes periods of missing time, waking in strange places within the orphanage with no memory of how she arrived there. Most concerning are her references to the singing, a sound she claimed came from everywhere and nowhere, a woman's voice that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her mind. June 7th, 1894. "I think James is gone. They told the children he was called away suddenly to attend to a medical emergency. When I questioned this, Augustus showed me a note in what appears to be James's handwriting, thanking them for their hospitality and promising to return in the autumn. But the hand that wrote those words was not steady. And this morning I found his pocket watch in the garden beneath my window, the case dented and the crystal shattered. James would never abandon his father's watch." The final coherent entry in Eleanor's journal is dated June 12th, 1894. "I know now what I must do. The children cannot be saved while the Grendels live and she hungers beneath our feet. The old stories my grandmother told about ancient things that feed on innocence, that call to children with sweet songs and promises, they were not mere tales to frighten the disobedient. I've seen the truth in the cellar. I've heard her singing in my dreams. I've gathered what I need: oil lamps, matches, the whiskey from Augustus's study. Tonight, when they lead the children to the woods for their unholy communion, I will end this. Fire purifies. Fire releases. May God forgive me for those I cannot save, and may He welcome them into His embrace." Historical records confirm that Birchwood Orphanage burned to the ground on the night of June 12, 1894. The official account attributes the blaze to an overturned oil lamp. 7 bodies were recovered from the ruins, those of Augustus and Millicent Grendel, Eleanor Webb, and 4 unidentified children. The remaining orphans were never found, despite extensive searches of the surrounding forest. For decades, the tragedy faded from memory, the land remaining untouched as the forest gradually reclaimed the charred foundation. But the story of Birchwood did not end with the fire. It merely entered a period of dormancy, waiting for someone to disturb its rest. April 16, 2023. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown ruins as Dr. Olivia Harlow parked her rental car at the end of the barely discernible access road. A tenured professor of anthropological history at Columbia University, Olivia had spent the last decade researching what she termed institutional hauntings, the psychological and sociological after-effects of trauma within contained communities. The Birchwood Orphanage case had been a footnote in her previous work, but the recent discovery of Eleanor Webb's journal had transformed it into the centerpiece of her upcoming book. "This is it," she said, more to herself than to her research assistant Marcus Chen, who was already unloading equipment from the trunk. Ground zero. Marcus glanced up at the dense forests surrounding them, his expression betraying unease. Hard to believe there was ever a building here at all. Nature's reclaimed everything. "Not everything," Olivia replied, nodding toward the barely visible stone foundation peeking through the underbrush. "And not the stories." They were not alone in their interest. The discovery of Webb's journal had sparked a flurry of activity in the academic community, particularly among those studying the intersection of folklore and historical events. Most scholars dismissed the more fantastical elements of Eleanor's account as the delusions of a troubled mind, perhaps suffering from ergot poisoning or carbon monoxide exposure from the orphanage's coal heating system. But Olivia suspected something more complex at work, something that connected Birchwood to similar incidents throughout the Appalachian region. What no one had yet discovered was Olivia's personal connection to the case. Her great-grandmother, Margaret Harlow, had been among the original 27 children at Birchwood. According to family law, Margaret had escaped the orphanage just days before the fire, making her way to a distant cousin's home in Pittsburgh with no memory of her time under Grendel care. She had lived a long life afterward, dying in 1972 at the age of 85, but had never spoken about her childhood. The only evidence of her early years was a recurring nightmare that plagued her until death, a dream of a woman singing in the walls. "Let's set up the ground-penetrating radar first," Olivia instructed, pulling on work gloves. "I want to map the entire foundation before we start the excavation tomorrow." Marcus nodded, assembling the equipment with practiced efficiency. "The County Historical Society is sending someone tomorrow, right? To oversee the dig?" "Dr. Lawrence Blackwood," Olivia confirmed. "Local historian, expert on West Virginia folklore. He's bringing his daughter along. Apparently she's some kind of sensitive, psychic, medium, whatever term they're using these days." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're okay with that? Seems outside your usual methodology." Olivia shrugged. "I'll take all the perspectives I can get. Besides, the Historical Society made her involvement a condition of our permit." They worked until dusk, mapping the outlines of what had once been Birchwood Orphanage. The GPR revealed not only the expected foundation but also anomalies beneath it, tunnel-like structures extending outward from what would have been the building's east wing, exactly where Eleanor said the underground chamber would be. Olivia murmured, studying the radar imagery on her tablet. "This is consistent with her journal." As darkness fell, they retreated to their rented cabin a mile down the road. The former sheriff's house now operated as a vacation rental by the Black Hollow Historical Society. The small town of Black Hollow itself had dwindled to a population of less than 300, its main street lined with more empty storefronts than active businesses. Like many Appalachian communities, it had never recovered from the collapse of the coal industry. Olivia spent the evening reviewing her notes while Marcus prepared a simple dinner. The cabin's walls were decorated with historical photographs of the area, including one that caught Olivia's attention, a group portrait labeled Black Hollow School, 1912. In the back row stood a young woman with a solemn expression and familiar eyes Olivia recognized from family photographs. "Margaret," she whispered, touching the image gently. "You came back here. Why?" "Sleep came fitfully that night." Olivia dreamed of walking through endless corridors, following the sound of a woman's voice singing a lullaby she almost recognized. She woke repeatedly, each time convinced she'd heard someone calling her name from just outside her window. By morning, her eyes were ringed with dark circles. "You look like hell," Marcus observed, sliding a cup of coffee across the kitchen table. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Olivia replied dryly. "Didn't sleep well. Something about this place gets under your skin," Marcus finished for her. "Yeah, I know what you mean. I kept dreaming about children watching me from the woods." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a mud-splattered jeep. Dr. Lawrence Blackwood was younger than Olivia had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. His daughter, Eliza, was a willowy girl of about 16, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at the people she met. "Dr. Harlow," Lawrence greeted, extending his hand. "A pleasure to finally meet in person. This is my daughter, Eliza." The girl offered a slight nod, but no handshake. "You brought something with you," she said, her voice soft but direct. "Something from this place." Olivia felt a chill despite the warm spring morning. "I'm not sure what you mean." "She does this," Lawrence explained, an apologetic smile creasing his face. "Picks up on things. Don't mind her." But Eliza persisted, her gaze fixed on Olivia. "In your suitcase, wrapped in silk. It belonged to a child who never left." Olivia's mouth went dry. In her luggage, carefully wrapped in a silk scarf, was a small silver locket, an heirloom passed down from her great-grandmother Margaret. The locket contained a lock of dark hair and had been sealed shut for as long as anyone in the family could remember. Olivia had brought it on an impulse, a tangible connection to her ancestors' experience at Birchwood. "How could you possibly know that?" she whispered. Eliza finally broke eye contact, looking toward the forest that concealed the orphanage ruins. "They told me, the ones who are still here." The excavation began under a cloudless sky, the spring sun warming the earth as the team carefully removed layers of soil and debris from the orphanage foundation. Lawrence oversaw the process with professional diligence, ensuring that every artifact was properly catalogued and preserved. Marcus operated the GPR equipment, refining their map of the underground structures. Eliza moved silently around the perimeter, occasionally stopping to press her palm against a tree or stone, her eyes closed in concentration. By midday, they had uncovered the entrance to the root cellar, a stone-lined descent into darkness that matched Eleanor Webb's description. The air that wafted up from below was cool and damp, carrying a faint, unidentifiable smell. "We should wait for the structural engineer," Lawrence advised, eyeing the deteriorated wooden supports. "This whole thing could collapse." "I need to see it now," Olivia insisted, already strapping on a helmet with an attached light. "Just a preliminary look. You can stay up here if you're concerned." Lawrence sighed but reached for his own helmet. "I'll come with you. Marcus, keep an eye on Eliza, would you?" But when they turned, Eliza was already halfway down the cellar steps, moving with the confidence of someone following a familiar path. "Eliza," Lawrence called, alarm evident in his voice. "Get back here right now." The girl paused, looking back over her shoulder with an expression that seemed older than her years. "It's okay, Dad. They want us to see." The descent into the cellar was treacherous, the steps slick with moisture and partially collapsed in places. Their headlamps carved tunnels of light through the absolute darkness, revealing stone walls marked with decades of water damage. At the bottom, Eliza waited patiently, her attention focused on a section of the dirt floor in the far corner. "There," she said simply, pointing. "Under the dirt, the door to the tunnel." Lawrence and Olivia exchanged glances before carefully approaching. Sure enough, clearing away the soil revealed a trapdoor of rotted wood, its iron handle still intact, despite the passage of time. "This matches the journal description exactly," Olivia breathed, excitement overtaking her earlier unease. "Eleanor wasn't delusional. The tunnel exists." Lawrence knelt to examine the door more closely. "We need to document this properly before opening it. Get photos, measurements, open it." Eliza interrupted, her voice suddenly urgent. "She's been waiting a long time." "Who has, honey?" Lawrence asked, concern creasing his brow. "The singing lady," Eliza replied as if stating the obvious. "She's been calling for so long, since before the fire." Despite his professional training urging caution, Lawrence could not deny his daughter's insistence. With Olivia's help, he carefully lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow passage that descended at a steep angle into the earth. The smell that rose from it was stronger now, a musty odor with something sweeter underneath, something that caught at the back of the throat. "We absolutely cannot go down there without proper equipment and backup," Lawrence said firmly, his academic caution reasserting itself. The air quality alone could be dangerous, not to mention structural stability. But Eliza had already slipped past them, disappearing into the tunnel with a quickness that left both adults momentarily stunned. "Eliza!" Lawrence shouted, panic evident in his voice as he scrambled to follow his daughter. Olivia grabbed his arm. "Wait, we need rope, better lights. If we both go rushing in unprepared, we're no help to her." "That's my daughter," Lawrence snapped, pulling free. "I'm not waiting." Olivia hesitated only briefly before following them both into the darkness, pausing just long enough to send Marcus a text with their location and situation. The tunnel was narrower than it had appeared, forcing them to hunch over as they descended. The air grew thicker, charged with a static-like energy that made the hair on Olivia's arms stand on end. They caught up to Eliza, where the tunnel widened into the chamber Eleanor had described in her journal. The girl stood motionless in the center, staring at the stone altar that remained exactly as it had been documented 129 years earlier. The symbols carved into the walls were still visible, though partially obscured by a film of white fungus that glowed faintly in the beam of their headlamps. "Oh my God," Lawrence whispered, his academic detachment crumbling as he took in the scene. This can't be." The altar bore the names Eleanor had described, dozens of them carved into the stone surface and arranged in concentric circles. In the center of the altar lay a small pile of objects: teeth, locks of hair, tiny finger bones, preserved as if placed there yesterday. "Dad," Eliza said quietly, her voice eerily calm. "Do you hear her singing?" Lawrence moved to his daughter's side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "There's no singing, honey. It's just the three of us down here." "Four," Eliza corrected, pointing to the wall behind the altar. "She's been here all along." Olivia directed her headlamp where Eliza indicated. The portrait Eleanor had mentioned hung there, somehow preserved despite the damp conditions. The canvas had darkened with age, but the subject remained clearly visible, a woman with flowing dark hair and hollow eyes, her mouth open in what might indeed have been song or scream. But what froze the blood in Olivia's veins was the face itself, a face she recognized from family photographs, from the image she had seen in the cabin just the night before. "That's impossible," she gasped, stumbling backward. That's my great-grandmother. That's Margaret." Lawrence pulled Eliza closer. "Your ancestor? But this painting would have been created before she was born, before the orphanage even existed." Eliza slipped from her father's grasp, approaching the painting with hand outstretched. "She's not who you think," the girl said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality. "She wore many faces. She needed the children, still needs them." Before either adult could react, Eliza pressed her palm against the canvas. A sound like distant thunder rumbled through the chamber, and the air grew suddenly, intensely cold. The fungus on the walls began to pulse with light, the rhythm matching the beating of their terrified hearts. "We need to leave, now," Lawrence said, reaching for his daughter, but Eliza remained fixated on the painting, her hand seemingly fused to its surface. "Eliza, honey, let go," he pleaded, trying to pull her away. "We need to go." "She won't let me," Eliza replied, her voice strangely doubled, as if another voice spoke simultaneously through her. "She says it's time to wake the others." With a sudden, violent motion, Eliza tore the painting from the wall, revealing a small alcove behind it. Inside lay a book bound in what appeared to be dark leather, its surface marked with the same symbols that adorned the chamber walls. "The Grendel Grimoire," Eliza announced, her voice still carrying that unnatural dual quality. "The true record. Not what the teacher wrote. The real story." Olivia stepped forward cautiously. "Eliza, give me the book. Whatever's happening to you, we can help, but we need to get out of here first." The girl turned, fixing Olivia with a gaze that seemed to see through her. "You brought her back," she said accusingly. "You wear her face, you carry her blood, and you brought the key." She gestured to Olivia's chest, where the silver locket hung beneath her shirt. A sudden realization dawned on Olivia, a connection she should have made earlier, but had been too rational, too academic to consider. Margaret wasn't one of the children, she whispered. She was the woman in the walls, the singing lady. As if in response to her words, a low humming began to emanate from the altar, the pile of small bones vibrating with the sound. The humming grew into a discernible melody, a lullaby so ancient it predated the written history of the region. Lawrence grabbed his daughter's shoulders. "Eliza, snap out of it. Whatever you're experiencing isn't real." But the girl only smiled, an expression utterly unlike her own. "Everything here is real, Dr. Blackwood. More real than the world you think you know." She held up the book. The Grendels understood. They were her servants, gathering children for her hunger, but the teacher interrupted the ritual. "The fire came too soon. She's been waiting for someone to complete what they started." The chamber began to shake, dust and small stones raining down from the ceiling. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the humming from the altar. "We need to get out of here," Olivia shouted over the growing noise. The whole structure could collapse. Lawrence finally managed to pull Eliza away from the altar, but the girl clutched the grimoire tightly to her chest. As they stumbled toward the tunnel entrance, a sound like tearing fabric filled the air, and the back wall of the chamber, solid stone by all appearances, split open to reveal a deeper darkness beyond. And from that darkness came voices, children's voices, singing in unison with the melody that now filled the chamber completely. "The missing children," Olivia gasped. "They've been here all along." Lawrence dragged his daughter toward the tunnel, but Eliza fought against him with surprising strength. "She wants you too, Dad," she said, her voice now completely transformed, deeper, older, hungry. "She wants all of you." With a desperate surge of strength, Lawrence lifted Eliza bodily and pushed her toward the tunnel entrance. "Olivia, take her," he shouted. "Get her out of here." Olivia grabbed the struggling girl, forcing her up the narrow passage. "What about you?" Lawrence was already moving toward the opening in the chamber wall, his academic curiosity seemingly overwhelming his fear. "I need to see," he called back. "I need to know what's in there." "Dad, no!" Eliza screamed, her voice suddenly her own again. "Don't listen to her singing." But Lawrence had already disappeared into the darkness beyond the stone. The chamber shook more violently, large chunks of ceiling now crashing down around the altar. With no choice, Olivia dragged the now sobbing Eliza up the tunnel toward the faint light of the cellar entrance above. They emerged, gasping into the relative freshness of the root cellar, just as a final massive tremor sealed the tunnel behind them, a cloud of dust billowing up from the collapsed passage. Marcus was waiting at the top of the cellar steps, his face pale with worry. "What happened? I got your text and—" He broke off, staring at Eliza, who stood unnaturally still, the grimoire still clutched to her chest. "Where's Dr. Blackwood?" "He's gone," Olivia said, her voice hollow with shock. "There was something down there, behind the walls, and he's with her now," Eliza interrupted, her eyes focusing on something distant. "With all the others." Helping the girl up the remaining steps, they emerged into the late afternoon sunlight. The excavation site appeared undisturbed, as if the violent tremors below had been contained entirely underground. Eliza sank to her knees in the dirt, still holding the grimoire. "She'll be coming for the rest," she murmured, "now that she's awake again." Olivia knelt beside her, gently taking the book from her unresisting hands. "Who is she, Eliza? Who is the singing lady?" The girl looked up, tears streaming down her face. "She has many names. The Grendels called her Mother. Before them, the settlers called her the Forest Bride. The native people called her Hunger in the Dark." She reached out suddenly, grabbing Olivia's locket through her shirt. "And she's part of you, has been since Margaret escaped." Olivia pulled back, unnerved. "My great-grandmother escaped the fire. She survived." Eliza laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "No one escapes her. Margaret didn't escape. She was sent out, carrying a piece of her into the world." She nodded toward the locket. "Open it." See what you've been carrying all these years." With trembling fingers, Olivia removed the locket from around her neck. The silver was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been. For generations, the family had respected the seal, never attempting to open the antique jewelry. Now something told her the time had come. The locket's clasp gave way with surprising ease. Inside was not just the lock of dark hair she had always been told about, but also a small, yellowed tooth, a child's milk tooth, partially blackened as if by fire. "A piece of her, and a piece of her food," Eliza said softly. "The perfect vessel for her return." Marcus stepped forward, his scientific skepticism reasserting itself. "This is crazy. Whatever's happening here, we need to call for help. Lawrence is still down there." But Olivia knew, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that Lawrence Blackwood was beyond any help they could summon. Just as she knew that what Eliza was saying, impossible as it seemed, was true. The locket in her hand pulsed with a warmth that seemed to sync with her heartbeat, the small tooth inside, gleaming in the fading sunlight. "We need to leave," she said, closing the locket with a decisive snap. "Now, before dark." "What about my dad?" Eliza asked, suddenly sounding like the 16-year-old girl she was. "We can't just leave him." Olivia helped her to her feet. "We'll get help, I promise, but we can't stay here." As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, a sound drifted up from the collapsed tunnel entrance. A woman's voice, singing a lullaby so sweet and sorrowful it brought involuntary tears to their eyes. And beneath it, barely audible, the voices of children joining in perfect harmony. "She's coming," Eliza whispered, clutching Olivia's arm. "She's found a way out." The sun dipped below the tree line as they hurried to their vehicles, casting long shadows across the excavation site. And in those shadows, just at the edge of perception, figures seemed to move, small silhouettes that flickered between the trees, drawing ever closer as darkness fell. In the back seat of Olivia's car, Eliza clutched the grimoire to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. "It's not just about hunger," she said as they drove away, the headlights cutting a path through the gathering night. "It's about family. She needs children, has always needed them. And now she's calling her descendants home." Olivia gripped the steering wheel tighter, the locket burning against her skin where she had hastily pocketed it. "What descendants?" Eliza's gaze met hers in the rearview mirror. "Margaret wasn't one of the children, Dr. Harlow. She was the vessel. And you are her descendant." She opened the grimoire, running her fingers over symbols that seemed to shift and change under her touch. The Grendels wrote it all down. How they found her, how they fed her, how they prepared for her return. "Return from where?" Marcus asked, his skepticism faltering in the face of what they had witnessed. "From before," Eliza replied cryptically. "From the time when the mountains were young and hungry, things walked freely between worlds." She turned a page in the grimoire, revealing a detailed illustration of the chamber they had discovered, but with one significant difference. In the drawing, the altar was surrounded by children, their faces turned upward in rapture as a dark, feminine shape emerged from the wall. "The ritual was interrupted," she continued, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a practiced storyteller. "The fire came too soon. She was meant to fully manifest, to take Margaret as her permanent vessel, but something went wrong. The teacher's interference forced her to split herself, part remaining trapped in the chamber, part escaping in the child who would become your great-grandmother." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You're saying some entity has been in my family for generations? That's absurd." "Is it?" Eliza countered. "Haven't there been signs, dreams of singing, children born with unusual birthmarks? Women in your family with unexplained knowledge or abilities?" The questions struck uncomfortably close to home. Olivia's mother had suffered from sleepwalking and night terrors her entire life. Olivia herself had been born with a strange, dark birthmark at the base of her spine, a mark her grandmother had called the lady's fingerprint, and the dreams of corridors and singing that had plagued her since childhood. "Even if what you're saying is true," Olivia said, struggling to maintain her academic detachment, "what does it mean for us now? What does she want?" Eliza looked out the window at the darkened forest passing by. To finish what was started in 1894. To fully manifest in this world, she hesitated, then added in a whisper, "using you as her vessel." The rain fell in sheets as Olivia, Marcus, and Eliza reached the small motel on the outskirts of Black Hollow. Their flight from the excavation site had been accompanied by increasingly bizarre phenomena. Radio stations dissolving into static that sounded disturbingly like children's laughter. GPS directions rerouting them in circles back toward the orphanage ruins, and most unnervingly, glimpses of small figures darting across the road in their headlights. Room 17 at the Pinewood Motel became their fortress against the growing darkness. Eliza sat cross-legged on one of the twin beds, the Grendel grimoire open before her, while Olivia paced the worn carpet, the silver locket now burning against her palm like a hot coal. "We need to destroy it," Marcus said firmly, nodding toward the locket. "Everything started when you brought it here." Olivia's fingers closed protectively around the silver oval. "It's a family heirloom. Besides, we don't know that destroying it would help." "It would," Eliza murmured, not looking up from the grimoire. "But she won't let you destroy it." The girl had been translating the book's arcane text with unsettling ease, as if the knowledge had been waiting dormant inside her. "The Grendels weren't the beginning," she continued. "They found her in 1889 in a cave system beneath what would become the orphanage property. They were occultists, searching for entities that existed before human civilization. When they found her, they recognized what she needed: children's life force, consumed at the moment of transition between innocence and understanding." Thunder shook the motel windows as Eliza turned a page, revealing intricate diagrams of the human body with unfamiliar symbols marking specific points: the base of the skull, the hollow of the throat, the center of the palms. The orphanage was built as a feeding ground. Every child who disappeared was prepared through ritual, their essence harvested to strengthen her. But the Grendels wanted more than just to serve her. They wanted to bring her fully into our world, to manifest her completely using a perfect vessel. "Margaret," Olivia whispered. Eliza nodded. "Your great-grandmother was chosen because she had the sight, the ability to perceive beyond normal reality. But Eleanor Webb discovered their plan and set the fire before the final ritual could be completed. In the chaos, Margaret escaped, carrying a fragment of her essence in that locket." Olivia sank onto the edge of the second bed. "So what happens now? What does she want?" "To finish what was started," Eliza replied. "The fragment in the locket has been calling to the part trapped underground for generations, growing stronger with each descendant. And now you've brought them back together." The lights flickered, plunging the room briefly into darkness before stabilizing. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. "There has to be a way to stop this," Marcus insisted. "Every supernatural entity in every culture has a weakness, a countermeasure." Eliza ran her finger along a passage in the grimoire. The text mentions a binding ritual, something the native people used long before the settlers arrived. "It requires 3 elements: the vessel, the fragment, and—" She hesitated. "A willing sacrifice." "That's not an option," Olivia said sharply. "There has to be another way." The bathroom door slammed shut without warning, followed by the sound of water running in the sink. Marcus approached cautiously, trying the handle. "It's locked," he reported, voice tight with alarm. "And I can hear singing." "A sweet, sorrowful lullaby drifted from behind the door, accompanied by the splash of water and the sound of small bare feet on tile. Olivia recognized the melody instantly, the same song that had haunted her dreams since childhood. "She's coming through," Eliza whispered, closing the grimoire. The barriers between worlds are thinning. The bathroom door burst open, releasing a flood of water that soaked the carpet. Standing in the doorway was a small figure, a child of perhaps 7, dripping wet, with hollow eyes and a smile that stretched too wide across its face. "Hello, Mother," the apparition said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. "We've been waiting for you to come home." Before anyone could react, the child dissolved into a dark mist that surged toward Olivia, enveloping her. She felt it enter her lungs, her bloodstream, seeping into the very marrow of her bones. The locket in her hand burned white-hot, searing the pattern of its engravings into her palm. "Olivia!" Marcus lunged forward, but an invisible force threw him against the wall. Eliza scrambled off the bed, grimoire clutched to her chest. "It's starting the manifestation." Olivia felt her consciousness being pushed aside, compressed into a small corner of her own mind as something ancient and hungry expanded within her. Her voice, when she managed to speak, was not her own. "Children," she said, the word emerging as a sing-song croon. "My beautiful children, waiting so long in the dark." Marcus struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Olivia, fight it. Whatever's happening, you can resist." But Olivia was drowning in memories not her own, centuries of hunger, of waiting in the dark beneath the mountains, of brief, glorious feedings orchestrated by faithful servants like the Grendels. She saw through different eyes now, understanding the delicious life force that bloomed in children at the cusp of knowledge, the intoxicating power that could be harvested in that perfect moment of transition. "The binding ritual," Eliza shouted to Marcus, flipping desperately through the grimoire. "We need to perform it now, before she fully takes control." The girl began reading aloud from the text, her voice rising above the storm outside, and the inhuman humming that now emanated from Olivia's throat. The words were in no language Marcus recognized, yet they seemed to physically impact the air around them, creating ripples of pressure that made his ears pop. As Eliza read, Olivia, or the entity now wearing Olivia's form, began to change. Her skin glowed from within, illuminating the network of veins beneath like dark rivers. Her eyes had gone completely black, reflecting nothing. When she smiled, her teeth appeared too numerous, too sharp. "You cannot bind what was never meant to be bound," she said, her voice layered with many others, women's voices, children's voices, all speaking in unison. "I am older than your words, older than your binding spells." The motel room shook, pictures falling from walls, furniture sliding across the floor. Outside, car alarms began blaring in chorus, their electronic wails harmonizing with the storm. In a desperate move, Marcus lunged for the locket still clutched in Olivia's transformed hand. His fingers closed around it just as she raised her arm, sending him flying backward again. But this time, the locket came with him, torn from her grasp. "The fragment!" Eliza cried. "Destroy it now!" Without hesitation, Marcus smashed the locket against the corner of the bedside table. The silver cracked open, releasing a wisp of dark smoke and revealing the blackened tooth inside. The entity in Olivia's body screamed, a sound of rage and hunger that shattered the windows and sent Eliza to her knees, hands pressed against her ears. In that moment of distraction, Marcus snatched up the tooth and grimoire, pulling Eliza toward the door. "Run," he shouted. "Get to the car." They burst out into the rain-drenched parking lot, the storm now reaching apocalyptic intensity. Lightning struck the motel sign, sending a cascade of sparks raining down. Behind them, Olivia, or what had once been Olivia, emerged from the room, her movements fluid and unnatural, her face a mask of hunger and ancient rage. "She's coming," Eliza gasped as they reached Marcus's car. "We have to complete the binding." As they sped away into the stormy night, Olivia stood motionless in the rain, her black eyes fixed on the retreating taillights. Around her, small figures began to materialize from the darkness. The missing children of Birchwood, their hollow eyes and two wide smiles matching her own. "Find them," she commanded, her voice carrying above the storm. "Bring them home." The children dispersed into the night like shadows, their bare feet making no sound on the wet pavement. Above them, the moon broke briefly through the clouds, illuminating the road back to where it all began. The ruins of Birchwood Orphanage, where the hunger had waited patiently for over a century, and where the final act would now unfold.